Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast, where we talk to foresters about how they are using digital technologies in their day-to-day forestry work. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast. It's my pleasure to have Mike Sutton, who's the Manager of Research and Innovation of Forestry Corporation in New South Wales. It's a mouthful, but super excited that Mike has agreed to join the show, because I think at the end of this one, you'll agree, man, this guy's got a broad base of experience. He's been innovating stuff we've been doing here, thinking we're blazing the trail. You know, you head down under to see Mike in Australia. They're already doing things and experimenting. So pleasure to have you on, Mike. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Kevin. It's a great idea, this podcast. And I'm really looking forward to just having a chat to you about some of the things that I've done.
Absolutely. So I before we started the show for our listeners, I just finished playing a hockey game. So I'm trying to cool down. I think I did one of those Apple iWatch breathing things for 2 minutes to try and cool down. And it said, yeah, your heart rate's about 105 beats per minute. I'm like, all right, I need to get that further down to 85. So I'm wearing my football jersey to try and cool myself down, although it's the Canadian Football League, so not like the National Football League. But Mike, so maybe start us off. Where are you based right now?
Right now, I'm actually based at home in Sydney because we're in week 15 of lockdown thanks to COVID.
Wow.
But so normally I'm based in Sydney in New South Wales. But it's been operating from the home office for a while now, which is a bit frustrating because it's a bit limiting. But thanks to technology like this, at least we can continue with some of the discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. So for our listeners who may be wondering which Sydney, if there's actually more than Sydney, I guess Canadians could be thinking Sydney like out east, but no, this is Sydney, Australia. So with the magic of technology, we're able to do this, which I still find mind-blowing, right? And what time is it on your end right now?
It's just gone 10 a.m.
10 a.m. All right. So it's gone 8 p.m. on a Sunday for me. So obviously you're a day ahead. You'll be drinking coffee. I'll be drinking water to try and again cool myself down.
I have my coffee here. So.
There you go. So to start things off, Mike, maybe I always ask people, how did you get into forestry? What's that story? Is there parents were involved with it, or maybe for our listeners, share us how you got into it?
It was one of those things where, I finished year 12 at high school and I was sort of thinking, I really don't know what to do. And so I actually had a gap year. And I was sort of, the thing that attracted me to forestry was sort of that mixture of science and rigor and sort of the outdoors and growing things. I've always liked growing things. And I actually, the next door neighbour to one of my aunts was in the forestry business in South Australia where I grew up. And she said, come and talk to my neighbour and, he can tell you a bit about forestry. So I did. And because I was having a gap year, I was lucky enough to get a job planting pine trees in the mid-north of South Australia and sort of talked to the local forestry staff there and sort of really enjoyed that. And then later in the year, I got another job sort of in the southeast of South Australia, which is sort of, I guess, it's called the Green Triangle region in Australia, which is sort of a bit of more of a hub for pine plantation forestry. And I got to see the resource and inventory side of things there, still just as sort of gap year employment. And on the basis of that, that was back in the good old days when the government was offering cadetships. So you could apply for a cadetship where you would get paid to actually study and then were bonded to work at the end of that course. So perhaps on the basis of the fact that I'd had these two jobs in my gap year, I was successful in getting a cadetship, which was, I think it was, if not the last, it was almost the last ones that was offered by the government. So, yeah.
Cool. Very cool. When you say cadetship, the first thing that jumps into my mind is is this like military cadets? But it sounds like it's not.
It's sort of like it's a scholarship,
right,
with so a payment while I was studying, and then sort of my payback was a commitment to work for what was the Woods and Forest Department in South Australia at the end of that.
Okay, very cool. So is most of your experience in Australia, or I've talked with some people on the show, they've kind of done the gallivant around the world and eventually come home, but has most of your career been in Australia?
I probably, compared to my peers, I was a bit unusual in that. So I went from my gap year to study at the Australian National University in Canberra, which is where the forest at that stage was the only place you could do a forestry degree in Australia. And so unlike my peers who sort of were doing the grand tour and traveling around, I actually got married when I was at uni, so I got married very young, and of course, because I was bonded to with the scholarship, then I started work straight after that. So my experiences my working experience has all been in Australia. Cool. But I've sort of moved around. So I've worked, as I say, started in the pine plantations in the Green Triangle of South Australia, but I've also worked in native forests in Victoria, and here in New South Wales, Forestry Corporation has both native forest and pine plantations. So I've been working my way around the coast of it, and I've been fortunate enough to travel, so been over to BC and also across to Fredericton on the east side, which I think is where we last met, wasn't it? And so that's sort of given me the opportunity to it's always good to meet people and talk to people who are working in different parts of the world, but in terms of my working life, it's all been in Australia.
Yeah, no, I've always loved meeting up with you. It's just like the ideas, and you're right. I was trying to think before this call. I was like, was it Melbourne when we had dinner, or was it Fredericton? And then it was Fredericton. And I always love your talks. I remember one where I think it was like you were introducing Forestry Corporation New South Wales, and it was like, what is Australia like? And you had this slide, and it was like, this will kill you, this will kill you, this will kill you, this will kill you. And it was like the whole slide, and I thought, oh my God, like, why would I ever want to go out and do field work in Australia?
That was the Remsoft one at Fredericton.
Yes,
and I was just going to give a sort of normal presentation. Well, this is how what we do in terms of our resource modelling and how we use Woodstock and other programs. And then they said, "Oh, there's going to be some other international. Can you talk a bit about Australia?" So I sort of threw this together at short notice, and I thought, well, that'll get people's attention. The number of things that can kill you in Australia.
I'm sure Australia tourism was not impressed with that presentation when they looked at it. It's like, oh, who's going to come by and look at this? But it was cool.
You guys have got bears that can eat you. At least
that is true. Relative, death by venom or something, or this thing hanging from a tree versus this ginormous animal charging you. But so no, it's been totally cool. And I think normally when I see it's at the Forest Tech event down in Rotorua, New Zealand, or Melbourne. So it's definitely been a long time. So thinking of your career, it's like, was it always technology at the start, or was it like boots on the ground, traditional work?
Well, so I've always sort of worked in the inventory and the resource. So it was certainly early in my career, it was sort of the inventory and the resources side of things. And when I started, it was field work was collecting data on paper forms, and we didn't even have PCs in the computer office, but early on I sort of got interested with one of my colleagues there in that inventory space. My first exposure really to the technology was the Husky Hunter field data entry unit, which was like a small brick.
Okay.
And it was ruggedized, and it was all programmed in BASIC. And we essentially just replicated what was on the paper forms out in the field. But you could do all these cool things, like you could validate data in the field and make sure that you hadn't put in a negative number, or that the increment from the previous measurement made sense and things like that. So that was pretty new, and I guess that sort of got me interested. I've always been interested in technology, and I guess trying to look ahead about how we can apply it. But I guess the main driver for me has always been about how can we use that technology to enable the field operations to be done, better, more efficiently, safer.
Yeah.
So and then sort of gradually as my career developed, then sort of went from also started looking at remote sensing. So that was sort of at this time when I was in Mount Gambier in 1983, there was big bushfires there called Ash Wednesday. And at that time, the sort of the post-fire assessment was still pretty much aerial photography, infrared aerial photography. But then sort of gradually sort of beyond that, we started getting, it was really not until I moved to Victoria, but I started getting into the remote sensing side of things as well. And starting to access that technology too.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, that brick you're saying back in the day, how much was it? I'm curious. I'm dying to know.
Yeah, I can't remember, but fiendishly expensive. Like it was one of those. And their selling point was that they were really rugged. Like ads showed you could drive a car over the top and things like that. So it was quite new, and I'm not even sure where the technology developed and how we sort of got onto it. But so even then it was sort of trying new things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
so maybe for our listeners, Mike, before we dive into some of the technology, because as our listeners are probably sensing, it's like you've seen a lot from early career, mid-career, maturing career, if we call that per se. Like you've seen a lot, so I'm interested to poke and get your insights on that. But maybe for our listeners, introduce us to Forestry Corporation of New South Wales and what they're doing. I took a look at the website to refresh my own memory. Pretty big land that's being under management. You've got forest management, planning, operations, harvesting, timber sale, like the whole kit caboodle. But maybe for our listeners, describe to us who Forestry is.
Yeah, so Forestry Corporation is what's called a state-owned corporation. So it's a government in effect it's a government-owned company. So we've got a board, we've got a couple of shareholders, which is sort of the Minister for Finance and the Treasurer in the government. But essentially we sort of operate as our own entity. We manage 2.2 million hectares in New South Wales. Mostly sort of in the coastal strip. So if I'd done my research better, I could tell you what the area of New South Wales is, but I don't have that at my fingertips. But I can tell you that our forest, the area that we manage, stretches from the Queensland border down to the Victorian border, and that's about 1,000 kilometres.
Wow.
So it's quite spread out, and it's mostly focused in that coastal strip because that's the higher rainfall area. So we've got the Great Dividing Range runs down that coastal fringe, and so the forests are sort of concentrated between the coast and then up onto the Great Dividing Range, which is nothing like a Great Dividing Range or the Sierra Nevadas in North America, but we're proud of it. And then sort of on the other side out west, it's sort of flat, dry country, and we've got cypress pine and then on the River Murray red gum forests. So mostly, so 2.2 million hectares, about 2 million hectares of that is native forest, which is mostly eucalyptus.
Okay.
And then we have about 250,000 hectares of pine plantation. Again, mostly radiata, but because of that latitudinal extent in the north of the state, which is getting up towards Queensland, where it's warmer and more humid, we grow southern pine up there.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay.
And about 30,000 hectares of eucalypt plantation, again on that northern coastal area.
Right. Very cool.
So you would have heard about the fires that we had in 2019-20 fire season. So they had a really big impact on the state, and with about 5.5 million hectares were burnt.
Wow.
Within Forestry Corporation, we lost 25% of our plantation resource, our pine
Wow.
plantation resource.
Wow,
So
wow.
huge impact. And when you're talking about wood supply, that's a big hole.
Yeah.
And also impacted about 40, a bit more than 40% of our native forest. So I'm not sure whether the listeners are aware, but the eucalypt forest has evolved, adapted to fire. So it has a number of mechanisms for dealing with fire. So some of our what we call our ash species on the higher elevations, they are prolific seeders after fire, so they'll drop a lot of seed. So that's their response. They're killed by fire. And some of the more coastal species might be damaged and burnt by the fire, and they might have their crowns burnt, but then we get a flush of epicormic growth, so new growth coming up out of the stem, up the bowl. But there's issues there in terms of damage to the wood, and in some areas, and it was the intensity was so much that even the eucalypts were killed.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting as we talk. I'm curious to pick your brain, because in Canada, BC, we had crazy fires there, and it just seems like every year now it's like fire, and like no matter where you are, like Greece, or I don't even know if Spain's on fire right now, but we'll get your thoughts on that. So you started talking about aerial photography. So this is a Digital Forester podcast. It's supposed to like tease out how people are using technology. I'm curious. I'm just curious to know right off the bat, I guess, from when you started your career to where you are now. What was is there a crossroad where the intersection of technology and people and forestry that is just a vivid turning point that you're like, wow, it's like the world has changed for foresters in general? Or do you think we're still kind of just evolving or modernizing, if that's the right word?
That's a real hard one, because you could come at it from a number of ways. So if we think of what technology has made the biggest impact, I guess it's got to be computing. I mean, when like I said, when I started, we didn't have PCs. We had a computer center, which was just sort of, again, for older people in the know. So it was a VAX 11750, and it was had the 2,400 foot tapes, and
some of our younger listeners will be like, I have no idea what this guy's talking about. Yeah, that's right. I don't know what this Aussie's talking about.
I often look back on not just my working career, but my life, and just think, in my lifetime. So I'm happy to say I was born in 1958. So in my lifetime, we've gone from having one satellite in space, Sputnik, to having however many we've got now, and that's just amazing to me. So all the so you've obviously got the benefits of the remote sensing side of things, but then all the technology that's needed to support all that, and that's where all the computing side of it. And now we're at the point where we've got a computer in our pocket.
Yep.
And certainly for us, we've invested in recent times. We've invested a lot in mobile mapping. So taking all that spatial information, all that remote sensing data, and putting it in people's hands in the field, so that when they're actually collecting or planning or operating or supervising harvesting, they've got all that information at their fingertips. And can collect data, which is then synchronized back. So where to start? So I think computing generally.
Well, that's a good segue. Like tell me more about that in terms of your field operations, because I actually have some questions I remember from 2 years ago I wanted to ask, because I guess it's like so cool what Mike's working on. I just never had the chance. So they're going to come. But when you talk about that, maybe describe to our listeners, like, what type of technologies are you guys in Esri shop? Are you custom building? What type of techs are you guys using?
So yes, we are an Esri shop. So we've been well, I probably should say that I've been with Forestry Corporation for just over 10 years. So I had about 12 years in the Green Triangle. I was overseas for a couple of years, then 15 years in Victoria, as I mentioned, in the native forest, and then came up here about 10 years ago. So in that time, in that 10 years, I've had the privilege, I guess, to manage a group of really smart people who, one of the first things when I started, they said, we've got this idea about we want to develop a mobile application. I said, we're at Esri shop, so you look around and see what's out there. But because we were trying to, I guess the business case for the mobile application was for ecology surveys. So for our native forest planning, then we have to do ecology surveys to identify, make sure the threatened species are accounted for, and we've got mapped exclusion areas, but we've still got to survey a potential harvest site to make sure that we've covered everything. Now the problem with ecology survey is it's hierarchical. So you'll have you go for at a particular site, you'll have a survey for an area, and then you'll have a number of sites, and within the number of sites you'll have a range of different ways you collect, whether it's plots or transects, and within each of those plots or transects you've got to collect information about species. So you need to have this hierarchical linkage. None of the products on the market,
okay,
the mobile products actually captured that. So we said, okay, well, can we develop it ourselves? So we started developing what we call Map App in 2011, 2012, and we've just sort of built on it. And when it first started, we had this ecology module, we call them, and that sort of, we started off with about 12 modules, and each of those were sort of code in their own right, and so it got to be a bit of a to make a change, you had to change it at the module level. We had it out once it got out in the field, then people coming back and saying, oh, we can use it for this, can you do this, can we have this? So then there was demand for more and more modules. So the next iteration, our version 2 of it, was to go from individual modules. So we've still got a range of modules, but to have a configuration file that can actually say, determine what the legend looks like, what the fields are that you're going to capture. So that gave us the capacity. So the module sort of grew from sort of 12 to 30 probably.
Wow.
And we're now just in the stage of starting to roll out version 3, which we were sort of the impetus for that was because the Esri SDK. So these are all we've just done it for iOS.
Okay.
We deliberately, because we were developing it ourselves in-house, we thought if we go with iOS, you've got one operating system and two hardware formats, so the phone and the tablet. Yeah. Whereas if you go Android, every manufacturer's got their own slightly
a fragmented ecosystem of Android. Yeah.
So that sort of kept it simpler for us. But then the iOS SDK from Esri was updated, and we couldn't just recompile our old code. So we took the opportunity. It was back in 2019. We took the opportunity to do a refresh of the UI UX as well as the design. So when version 3 is sort of out and operating, it's we're now starting to use it. Yeah. It's I guess a more contemporary sort of looks more like the sort of the standard iOS type interface, but what's underneath it is still the same. The other thing that we did at the same time as we were sort of doing that development was that we made a conscious decision to move the back end. So as I mentioned, that it's a two-way process. So it not only displays information, but it's a way of capturing information in the field. a lot of the sites that we operate on, which is probably the same in forestry around the world, a lot of them don't have cellular coverage.
Yep.
So we have a SQLite database,
yep.
And then so everything can be cached when the information is captured in the field, and then we need to be able, when we're back in range, to be able to synchronise that back with the geo database and in the on the server. So one of the more as the usage grew, and particularly as we started doing things like collecting track points from harvesting machines, then the volume of data increased, and the importance of reliability became more important. So we actually moved from on-premise storage of the geo databases and the services to AWS.
AWS, okay.
So it's all sitting in AWS now.
Yeah, cool.
That means that we've got much better reliability, and also you can do things. Well, people who know how to do these things can do things like load balancing, and so we can spin up additional information, additional servers if we need it, and we can load balance across servers. Yeah,
very cool, very cool. And for our listeners, just put this in context. Like, this is Mike working for a forestry company, talking about UI UX, which is jargon from a technology company that you don't hear. And we're talking 2011 when this started. So, this is 10 years back that these guys have been doing this stuff. So it's pretty early, truthfully. I'm curious, like, for some of our listeners, they might be thinking, like, holy cow, it's like how deep are the pockets of Forestry Corporation of NSW here? Like, how big's the development team to support this? Because it sounds like, it's got traction. It's been running for almost a decade. V3 is coming out. There's more reinvestment in updating the code base and whatnot. But like, maybe I'm curious to know how big's the dev shop that's supporting this?
One developer. And we don't have a business analyst. I've just got so my manager of my spatial systems team he's conceptualized all this, but we've got one developer. We did get some external help with the SDK transition and the UI UX design. So we contracted that out, but so the rest of it's just been done in-house. So I've got a pretty small spatial systems team. It totals about, I think at the moment it's about 12. But they're doing a whole range of other things as well.
Right. But very cool.
The other thing that we've done to again, because we couldn't quite get what we wanted from the market, is we've also developed our own content management system now. So one of the things about version 3 of MapApp is it's all plan based. So so you go to an area and you have a plan. What Plan Portal does is you can enter information into the Plan Portal via a web interface, and you can define an area and get all the spatial information. So Esri tile packs are the sort of the basic file type that we display the spatial information on. So you can define your area in Plan Portal. You can automatically generate tile packs for your defined area out of either ArcMap or Arcgis Pro. But the other thing is that you can add any other documents. So, for example, it might be a plan for a harvesting operation. So there might be contractor induction information, or there might be site safety plan, or there might be, for an ecology survey, there might be a species identification checklist. So all those documents, and they can be PDFs, can also be loaded into Plan Portal. Then when you go out into the field and you open up MapApp, you've got the option to say, show me the plans that are in where I am. So you've obviously got location services from the iPad. And then you just select your plan and you say, make that the current plan. And then that synchronizes with the Plan Portal and brings all that information in. So you can open the tile packs in in Map App, but you can also view all the associated documents. And people working in the field can collect field notes, contractors can collect notes, and it all synchronizes back in through this content management system.
Cool. Now, is that... Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just to finalise that, one of the issues about operating in native forest is, from a compliance point of view, then there's a reporting and a monitoring and a reporting requirement. So what we've got in Plan Portal is we control access to various documents and maps by tags. So Forestry Corporation staff can see all the relevant documentation. Contractors can see their own documentation. So we've got a contractor tag. Our regulator is the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. So we've got an EPA tag, and nice. Then we've got a public tag. So if people want to be, you can register for an account on which is just an email address on Plan Portal, and then you can see all the public access documents, which is like, this is our plan of operations maps, and this is all the survey results and whatever. So
yeah, so is Plan Portal, Mike, meant to be your FMS, your forest management system, or is it purely a CMS and you got an FMS?
It's a CMS. We've got forest management system is sort of a whole separate process. So this is specifically a CMS. Yep.
Okay, and what FMS does Forestry Corp use on your side, or custom, or is it?
It's custom.
Wow,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So it's so neat to hear, because again, that's why I love chatting with you every time, because you guys are like blazing the trail and money friends, trying different things, and so it's really fascinating. Curious to know, because you're an Esri shop, and I know a lot of people I talk to, they're like, with the new Arcgis Enterprise, and this isn't a negative comment to Esri, but with all these users, that named user subscription model they're taking. How are you guys using Enterprise, or are you still using server to bypass the need for the named users?
We're still using server, and we have an Enterprise. So we have a 3-year Enterprise license agreement with Esri, which is perfect for the AWS environment, because, as I said, if we need to spin up additional servers, then we can. It's the cost of the Arc server license is covered by our Enterprise agreement.
Gotcha.
We do have as part of that some named user access, but because we so Map App's not a externally available product. So it's
some listeners, are going like, damn it! It's like
it's one of my things is to look at there is definitely interest, and particularly more so since the fires, in having a commercially available version of it. And I know that various forest techs people have come up to me and said, that sounds great, can we get it? And my response has always been, we're just a little forestry group, we're not a software development company.
Yeah.
So it's there. It's just sort of finding the time to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the thing. They're like, once you release things public, everyone's got their, I call it, opinions on what should be there and should not be there, or how things should work. Yeah. And if you've got one dev on there, it can be challenging. So
we're looking at whether just within New South Wales agencies, where there's other government agencies that are interested in. It's not sort of a full commercial license, but sort of having a licensed access to it. We're still a bit of a way off from that.
Right. Well, I guess being a Crown Corp or owned by Crown Corp, there's probably some mandates to cross-fertilize with other Crown Corps and state.
Yeah, that's right. And particularly the fire, because we had a Royal Commission and a state fire inquiry following the big fires in 2019-20, and one of the things that came out of that is, well, how can we get better commonality with across the various firefighting agencies? So.
Yeah, very cool. So let me pivot us, because I know our listeners are like, when are you going to ask him, Kev? When are you going to ask him? Tell me about LiDAR. What's Forestry Corporation of New South Wales doing on that front?
Again, that's sort of in my working lifetime. We've sort of gone from what's LiDAR to now it's not only is it routine. We've got mobile LiDAR. But I guess we started again. I started in 2011, and around about that time, a little bit before, some other people that were in my group had looked at LiDAR, and I guess as a sort of government campaign. So originally, the first LiDAR we captured was in the west of the state, but we soon realised, of course, that the forests on the coastal forests are characterised by their moist eucalypt forests, so particularly on north of Sydney. So they're very dense canopies. Okay. And we started off talking about aerial photography, and it's very hard to interpret aerial photography where you've got a continuous cover of canopy. Yeah. So we actually first started looking at LiDAR as a way to get a good DTM, because we wanted to model our stream network. And that proved very useful. And the reason that the stream network is important is that in our native forest operations, we can't. It's not a clear fell, burn and sow operation. It's what we call a single tree selection, but it's sort of varying intensities of single tree selection. But there's always areas that have to be protected, so rainforest, old growth forest, yep, but also streamside reserves. So from a planning point of view, it was really important to know where the streams actually were.
that little detail, right?
and for the field guys that are trying to mark up the area prior to harvest. And when we eventually did get LiDAR, and we sort of again, another clever person in my team had sort of looked at different stream modelling options, and we'd sort of looked at the Esri accumulated flow model, and that didn't quite do it. So we ended up running with a process called GeoNet. So we developed these what we call our GeoNet stream layer, and when you compared that with the old topographic layer, which was essentially from aerial photo interpretation. Yeah,
night and day.
It's chalk and cheese. Like we had, because once with LiDAR, you can penetrate the canopy, you get a good DTM, and then you can model the streams. So we started off by displaying the old topographic stream network information on top of the shaded relief from the LiDAR DTM. And we had streams going up and over ridges, and we had, and you could see from the shaded relief where the gullies were, and the mapped watercourse were nowhere near it. So that was probably our first big area, and in LiDAR, and we had the opportunity. So there's a government agency that sort of does surveys, and, okay, and they were doing a big survey down the coastal strip to get a DTM to actually look at sea level rise from a climate change point of view. Yep. So we had, being another government agency, where that overlapped with our state forest, then we were able to get access to that information. And there was some older stuff that was from local councils, and then there was LiDAR that we captured ourselves. Now that was good, but it also meant we had this real patchwork of different specifications. So the early LiDAR was the very early LiDAR was probably about half a pulse per square metre. Most of what we captured, we could get good DTM information with 2 pulses per square metre. Yep. And of course now the 12 is sort of the minimum. Yeah. But so originally it was really just about that DTM and the stream network, but then we got sort of looking also again through the likes of Forest Tech, looking at plot imputation. And in fact, even though the plot imputation, a lot of the early plot imputation work was done by the likes of Interpine in New Zealand in the pine, our LiDAR capture had been focused on the native forest because of this requirement for the streams layer. So we actually were looking at, well, can we develop an imputation for our native forest, because it's low intensity but extensive, as opposed to small area intensive management that you get in your pine forest.
Yeah.
And it certainly was an improvement. I mean, at least we could get a volume surface across an area, whereas our conventional inventory in native forest was about one plot per 250 hectares. And then you're trying to do a rough stratification based on, we've probably got 50 commercial eucalypt species on the north coast. So you can't, and you can't, they all grow in associations, so you can't segregate out individual species. So we were really looking at sort of a mix. So LiDAR was good, and that was, I guess, the first time that we started going from plot level information to
wall-to-wall census.
Information. So,
well, as you describe that, I can guarantee there's some listeners that are probably laughing, slapping their knee, because they're like, that's exactly the experience I had in terms of, it's all about the terrain first, and forget about the above vegetation. Then it's about floodplain mapping as a driver, the hydrology component. Then it's like that piecemeal of partnerships, who's got what and stuff. And then now it sounds like for everyone, it's just another tool in a forester's toolkit per se. You guys are big on drones too. So this is a question that's been stewing since I don't know if it was Fredericton or Melbourne, but you guys were flying, I think, Phantoms, DJI Phantoms, Forest Fire. And then if I remember correctly, there's something about you didn't like, you couldn't do something. So you got one of your guys to hack was it an Xbox controller or something? You hacked something to override some control. And I was like, this is like so cool. And then am I totally out to lunch and forgetting about that story?
It wasn't a hack. We actually, just go back a bit. So yes, I started investigating the idea of drones back in 2017. And again, so that was the time when sort of drones it was really a bit before DJIs were really on the market much. And the EB, the one with the polystyrene wings and the little Canon sure shot camera in it. Now, at the time, they were over $20,000, well over $20,000. And I was sort of looking at this and thinking, well, if we're going to have a drone program, we're managing 2 million hectares. There's not much point buying one drone, because how would you decide? Do you have one person who travels around the state and does all the drone imagery? So I actually went off and got my remote pilot's license just so I could understand what was involved, and also look at and talk to some of the people in the business about what the trends were. So we then made a conscious decision we started off by just doing a bit of a trial with 12. We trained up 12 pilots. So here in Australia, we've got something called CASA, so the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. Okay. So they cover anything that goes in the air, including drones. So there were all these requirements that we had to make sure that we complied with CASA. So we trained up 12 pilots, remote pilots, and I tried to cover the geographic extent, the hardwoods and softwoods extent, and also different activities, so fire and planning. Now, with 12, it was just a bit of it was really just is there something that we can use? And we made, as part of that, we made a conscious decision. Well, we're going to go with the DJI consumer grade, because we can buy a lot of DJI drones compared to a single expensive drone, and my vision is that it just becomes another tool available to field foresters. And I said before, I'm keen to make sure that the investment and the development that we do in technology is something that can be applied. It's useful in the field.
Yeah.
So yes, we sort of, and on the basis of that 12, then we've sort of grown. And so we've now got 50 trained pilots across the state.
50?
50.
Wow.
So I had to put on a drone coordinator to help me manage that, because it soon became too much for me. And so I think we've got about 60 drones, so in 20 locations, and 20 of those drones are thermal capable. Okay. So mostly the Mavic Enterprise duals, but we also do have 2 Matrice M210s with high resolution thermal cameras.
Okay, so mostly camera-based, not LiDAR or anything of that nature. It's mostly for fire.
But so, to come back to your question about the hack, wasn't a hack so much as I had this idea. I thought, well, we've got Map App, and we can take our iPad out in the field, and we can use the blue dot to tell me where I am. And wouldn't it be useful if we could actually use the drone location rather than the location service from the iPad? So again, I'm just lucky that I know clever people. So we got in touch with a developer actually in Adelaide in South Australia through the contacts that we had through our drone training program actually. And he said, oh yeah, I think I can do that. So we ended up with this piece of software we call DLOC for drone location, which just essentially uses peer-to-peer communication between the drone controller. So the drone controller's obviously got information about the XYZ of the drone in space.
Yeah.
And then we just use a peer-to-peer connection to another iPad, or if you really want to, you can do it in split screen on one iPad, which is running Map App. And then in our Map App developer just added in an external, you could switch from the internal GPS to the DLOC location, and then your blue dot changes to a nice little blue drone. And cool. So you can fly the drone around, you can record point locations or lines or polygons in Map App and capture it there. So with the thermal capability from a fire point of view, we can then, if we're doing mopping up post after a fire, we can fly the edge, find the hotspots, map the actual location of the hotspot, synchronize that back into AWS, and then if people on the ground, if they're in online mode rather than offline, then they'll get that data synchronized back in, and they can say, oh, well, that's where and then they can use their location service in their iPad to navigate their way to where the hotspots are and put the wet stuff on the hotspot, and the hotspot gone.
Yeah, cool. And I remember that story. I just kind of like, that's like genius. Like, it's so cool. It's like practical. And I love it. You're like, oh, it's like, utility. You're focused on making sure it's useful. And I remember that story going like, that's crazy cool. It's like awesome innovation there. So, we could chat forever. We haven't even talked about Earth observation, and I have like a bajillion other questions there, but maybe briefly tell us, what are you doing anything space using, any of the new satellite technologies out there in your programs?
Yep. So the thing that I'm working on at the moment, and started it just before COVID, so it's kind of mucked up the field evaluation of it. When I mentioned before about the operating particularly in native forest, but also has utility in plantations, is knowing where you are accurately in the forest. So I've got this thing in my head which says we would be really good to get sub-canopy, sub-meter resolution on our GPS units. So back in, I think it was 2018-ish, there was a program here in Australia and New Zealand to investigate the business viability of an SBAS program.
Okay.
Yep. Now I know in the Northern Hemisphere you've sort of had them for a while, but it was something new down here, and I thought there's got to be a better way to get this differential correction, because again, location, yes, we've got ground-based continuously operating reference stations, but they're few and far between out in the regions, and connectivity is always an issue. So what can we do? So I got Forestry Corporation on as sort of, there was this SBAS test bed program that was conducted by what we have here called cooperative research centres. So that's industry and universities. So we had a cooperative research centre for spatial information. Okay. And they were sort of tasked with doing this testbed analysis of SBAS. And there was I think about 12 different themes, marine and agriculture and mining and transport and rail. And so but I didn't, I sort of put our name forward to be the testbed for forestry in Australia. So we got to do that, which gave us exposure to that SBAS technology. The trials that we did as part of that, we were using some prototype receivers, and they didn't perform particularly well in the forest. So the results were they weren't quite as good as
underwhelming.
If you're using satellite-based correction services in agriculture and mining, you've got nice, big, clear, open sky.
Yeah.
Forestry, that canopy gets in the way again. So post that, we had to sort of work with the group in Melbourne that was sort of bringing all this together and tried. We looked around to see what other currently available devices were available. So I actually tested the geode receiver. So it's a Juniper Systems one.
Yep.
Which actually went quite well. So what we did was we surveyed. So I did a total station survey in 3 different plantation. So young unthinned, old unthinned, middle-aged thin plantations, and 2 native forests. Canopy type, so sort of a light to medium canopy and a heavier canopy. So we had an accurate line, and so we could walk with these devices and connect using the map app. So we adapted the map app so we could capture the NMEA stream.
Yep. And
then we could compare that with the survey transect. So, and this was while SBAS was still operating, but it was only in a test phase for this for the testbed process.
Yeah.
And it looked really promising. Then, of course, that service got turned off in July last year because the trial was over. Now, the Australian government, Australian and New Zealand governments have committed to it. So we're going to be getting a system called SouthPan, which is really SBAS for Australia and New Zealand.
Cool.
But we're still in the process of calling for tenders. It's going to be a while before that becomes available.
Yeah.
So then the next thing that I did was actually the last forest tech that I was at in Melbourne when we were able to travel. I actually got to meet up with some people to talk about the EOS receivers. So Canadian company.
Yeah. They're just an hour and a half drive. Jean, you know them well.
Yep. So, and again, at that stage, we were still talking about SBAS. So it was really, is this how does this compare with the geode? So the geode sort of was a self-contained, ruggedized unit. The arrow units out of EOS had the external antenna, so pros and cons. And we'd had a chance to have a look at it and test it just in Melbourne. We could pair both of them with our iPads and get them to show as an external GNSS unit in map app.
Yeah.
It's like COVID, the combination of COVID and the SBAS signal disappearing sort of caused me some grief. But then talking with the EOS guys, they said, "Oh well, we have got a version." We all agreed that the best option for us was going to be the Arrow 100 with SBAS. But because we didn't have SBAS, what do? In the meantime, we're getting increasing pressure from a compliance point of view to be able to show that because our harvesting contractors have our map app running on an iPad, but it's only using the internal location service.
Yeah.
So, and that's actually pretty good for under forest canopy, but it's sort of 5 to 10 metres probably. I really want to get down to this meter or better.
Yeah.
So EOS have a different model. So they're Arrow Gold, which uses the Atlas subscription service for the correction service. So again, very happy with the support we've been getting from EOS in Canada and here in Australia. So we've been able to test that sort of as an interim, because we know SBAS is coming.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just we don't know when it's coming, and this way we thought, okay, well, even though it might not be quite as good as the Arrow 100, by having the Arrow Gold plus the Atlas subscription, we can at least put it in a harvesting machine, try the location of the external antenna, see how we go pairing it to the iPad and to Map app. So we've actually been doing that just literally only the last few months.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool.
And today or tomorrow, I'm expecting one of the, I think there were 3 pre-production units produced of the Arrow 100 Plus.
Okay.
Which has both SBAS and Atlas.
Nice.
So we're going to test that. And then, of course, that'll be great, because then we could use it with Atlas until SBAS is available, and then switch over.
And then just go over. Yeah. No, that's very cool. It's absolutely fascinating stuff. And for like a lot of our listeners on North America, like, we're spoiled because we have those SBAS corrections. And even, as I talk to folks in Latin America, they're like, we don't have that. It's like, with Atlas, you got to be able to see it, right? They're to get the correction. And for our listeners, this is the differential corrections for the position to remove some of the drift, other errors, if you will, so you can get that XYZ down a little bit tighter. So yeah, definitely a treat. So I know we're already at our hour mark, and I'm like, I can talk to Mike for like another hour per se, but as we, and I'm sure there'll be other opportunities to follow up, but as we wind down, I'm just curious. I always ask people on the pod, what gets them excited in the next year, 3-year, 10-year time frame, and guaranteed our listeners are like, and I'll say it, like, you're always, I've loved chatting with you, meeting with you, because you're always so humble. It's like, I've got all these smart people, I've got this, and then if you listen carefully, it's like, I got my own RPAS pilot certificate, I did this, and like certified in this, and so you're always just so like, you're a good Canadian, I guess, per se. But thinking of 1-year time frame, 3-year time frame, 10-year, you're the manager of innovation and research. Clearly, everyone listening can probably understand why. Lots of great ideas. It's clear you've got that thought, technical leadership, some vision on where you see the world going. But what gets you? Maybe break it down 1, 3, 10. What gets you excited in that 1-year time frame to start?
Yeah, I think the most exciting thing, or we're on the cusp of, and it's probably between the 1 and the 3. But so I mentioned before the idea of going from plot-based inventory to having a whole coverage through imputation. I think we are not far from getting to tree level information. So as LiDAR technology improves and becomes more affordable, and becomes more ground-based, so you've got units like HoverMap, so you can walk around and get a really good point cloud, really dense point cloud. I was trying to think when it was, but a while ago, forest techs are great for these sort of generating ideas. And I remember at breakfast one time in Rotorua with Christine Stone, who some of you listeners might know, as a very well-known and respected remote sensing specialist, among other things. Yep. And I said she actually had a bit of money left over from another project we were collaborating on, and she said, I've got this bit of money left over, what do you think we could do with it? I said, look, I reckon we should be trying to see what we could do with a virtual plot, because a lot of the areas that we operate in, we have heavy undergrowth. So in the native forest, we have this weed called lantana, which is just dreadful to walk through. And in some of our pine forests, we've got really bad blackberry problems. Like
I've heard about blackberries, yeah.
I mean, like over 2 meters high, walls of blackberry. And so I said, well, think of the safety and the cost implications if rather than sending people in to go and measure trees, we could collect enough information to be able to have a virtual plot. And we could actually cruise that information on a screen rather than in the forest. And, we are nearly there. So we've started with helicopter-based Regal Vux 1, very high point density above canopy in pines. There's a couple of research projects going on at the moment looking at using VR to visualize that plot data to the point where you can put a set of goggles on an experienced cruiser and they can take the measurements and assess the qualities of the trees in the plot. And then that sort of has been good in terms of proof of concept. Now with the access to the higher point cloud information from things like the hovermap sensors, then the quality of the point cloud goes up a notch. Still looking at this sort of the visualization aspect of it, it looks like we'd be able to sort of identify forks and upper crown features that we couldn't actually really see before. So then you combine that with higher resolution aerial LiDAR, individual tree detection and crown detection, the ground-based resolution, so and the ability to navigate sub canopy. If you can get that sub canopy sub-meter, then you can start doing things at the tree level. And in fact, another thing that we've been looking at, I won't go into the detail of it because we're running out of time, but if you look at some mechanized planting, and we've done one trial already, and we're looking to do a sort of a more of an operational trial perhaps next year. But mechanized planting of plantation trees, you can accurately locate where each individual tree is planted.
Absolutely.
So you start off with a map, and you know where the trees are. Then you can, whether you're flying it with aerial LiDAR, whether using ground-based LiDAR, also photogrammetric point clouds, you can do amazing stuff. If you can track individual trees, and then sort of the 10-year time frame. Another thing that we've been chipping away at, well, research have been chipping away at, I just have ideas, is can we combine sensors on machinery that's operating in the forest that can inform the operator, so during a harvesting operation. So you might have, if you think about, I know exactly where the tree was planted. I know from my aerial LiDAR capture and plot imputation where each individual tree is and what sort of volume to expect. I've got my sub-meter, sub-canopy GNSS working, so that plus we've got, obviously got to work out where's the antenna compared to the head at the end of the boom. That's just, if I've got an iPhone that's got an accelerometer in it, then I'm sure someone can work out where the head is relative to the antenna. Then you can say, okay, I know I'm at this tree. What do I already know about this tree? Add to that additional information from sensors from the machines that are actually scanning ahead and looking particularly in that upper crown, so where you've got branching and sweep are the two biggest write downs for your value. So if you can get information, and for the operator in the harvesting machine, they often can't see that, so they're just going to cut it. They'll try and optimize it. But in terms of adding value, if you can combine all that information and process it fast enough that you can inform the operator, better value recovery. And if you can do it remotely, then better safety outcomes as well.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, you're tapping on, processing that edge, right? A lot of that data, doing that work when there's no connectivity. You're dancing around real-time communication, with the Starlinks and all the other options, right? And basically like that digital twin of that forest. Like there's other sectors, smart cities and whatnot.
Yep.
I think we will see that smart forest come in. So again, as I said, I'm sure our listeners are like, holy crap, it's like who is this guy? And and as I said, love chatting with you. You're always so humble. It's like, research. I'm like, I know you well enough from the years, my friend. So people who want to reach out to you to talk more, learn more, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Email? Are you a LinkedIn guy? Are you a Facebook?
So I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, and then just email me at Forestry Corporation. So mike.sutton@fcnsw.com.au.
Very cool. Very cool. And so for our listeners, anyone who wants to reach out to Mike, highly encourage you to do that. You'll have these great conversations. I love every single one of them. I do wish we were able to do it in person. It's been several years which we connected, and we always have fun bantering back and forth. Yes, one day, absolutely. So hey, thanks very much for agreeing to do this. I really appreciate your time. I'm hoping your lockdown kind of breaks. You're entering summer, and things will open up, and you'll be able to get out and enjoy things and be safe. But thanks so much for joining the Digital Forester podcast.
That's been great, Kevin, and it's a really good idea, and well done on setting it up.
Awesome, good stuff. All right, we'll talk soon.